Have you ever felt something before anything actually happened? Not a guess. Not a fear. But a quiet, persistent feeling that something isn't right. And the strange part is, you couldn't explain it. There was no clear proof. No obvious reason. But deep down, something felt off. Maybe it was the way someone spoke to you. Or the way their energy shifted, just slightly. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point to. But enough to stay in your mind. And you tried to ignore it. You told yourself you were overthinking. You tried to stay logical. You tried to move on. But the feeling didn't leave. It stayed quietly in the background. Showing up at random moments. Pulling your attention back. Almost like a signal you weren't supposed to ignore. So you questioned yourself. Am I imagining this? Why can't I just let it go? And the more you tried to silence it, the stronger it felt. Not louder, but clearer. And here's what makes it even more unsettling. A part of you doesn't feel confused. A part of you feels certain. Certain that something is hidden. Certain that something isn't being said. And even if you don't know what it is, you can feel that it exists. That quiet knowing. It doesn't come with evidence. It doesn't come with explanation. But it stays. Steady. Consistent. Unmoving. And the more you sit with it, the more it feels like something is building. Like something beneath the surface is slowly moving toward you. Not forced. Not rushed. But inevitable. And maybe that's the part you can't ignore. Because this doesn't feel like fear. It doesn't feel like imagination. It feels like awareness. So the real question isn't, why do I feel this? The real question is, what if this feeling isn't trying to confuse you? What if it's preparing you? Because sometimes, before the truth is spoken out loud, you feel it in silence first. Let's slow this down for a moment. Because what you're feeling right now, it's very easy to misunderstand. It's easy to label it as overthinking. To call it anxiety. To assume it's just your mind creating stories. But it's not that simple. And more importantly, this is not your fault. You weren't taught how to trust this part of yourself. In fact, you were taught the opposite. From a very early point, you learned to rely on what you can see. What you can prove. What you can explain logically. If something couldn't be explained, it was dismissed. If something didn't make sense immediately, it was ignored. And over time, you started doing that to yourself. You began questioning your own signals. Second-guessing your own awareness. Telling yourself things like, it's probably nothing. I'm just thinking too much. I shouldn't jump to conclusions. And on the surface, that sounds reasonable. But here's what quietly started happening underneath. Every time you dismissed that inner feeling, you weakened your trust in it. Not because the feeling was wrong, but because you were trained not to listen. And the truth is, your mind has two very different ways of understanding the world. One is slow, logical, analytical. It needs evidence. It builds conclusions step by step. But the other is fast, quiet, instant. It doesn't explain. It recognizes. It picks up on patterns, tones, subtle shifts. Things your conscious mind hasn't had time to process yet. And when it does, it sends you a signal. Not in words, but in feeling. That slight discomfort. That sense of something being off. That quiet awareness you can't shake. That's not confusion. That's recognition, happening faster than explanation. But because you were taught to trust logic first, You learn to ignore recognition. And that's where the conflict begins. You feel something deeply. But you can't explain it clearly. So you assume the feeling is wrong. But what if it's not? What if the feeling is actually accurate? And the explanation just hasn't caught up yet? Think about how many times in your life you realized something after it became obvious. Moments where you said, I knew it. I felt it from the beginning. I just didn't listen. That's not coincidence. That's your awareness, being ahead of your reasoning. And instead of trusting it, you were taught to wait for proof. But here's the problem with that. By the time proof arrives, the situation has already unfolded. The clarity comes, but late. And that delay creates doubt. Not in the situation, but in yourself. You start believing, I should have seen it earlier. I should have trusted myself. But instead of learning to trust it next time, you hesitate again. Because you're still waiting for permission to believe what you feel. And no one ever gave you that permission. So let me say this clearly. You're not overthinking. You're not being paranoid. And you're definitely not imagining things for no reason. You're responding to something real. Something subtle, yes. Something not fully visible yet, yes. But real. Your system is picking up on information before it becomes obvious. And instead of honoring that, you've been trying to silence it. Not because you're weak, but because you were taught that certainty must come from proof. And anything else is unreliable. But that's not how awareness works. Awareness doesn't wait for confirmation. It moves ahead of it. And when you start to understand that, something begins to shift. You stop fighting the feeling. You stop trying to suppress it. You stop needing to justify it immediately. And instead, you allow it to exist. Without panic. Without judgment. Just observation. Because the goal isn't to react to the feeling. And it's not to ignore it either. It's to recognize it as information. Not final answers. Not conclusions. But signals. And when you stop labeling those signals as wrong, you begin to feel something different. Less confusion. Less tension. More clarity, even without explanation. Because now, you're no longer at war with yourself. You're no longer trying to convince yourself that what you feel isn't real. You're simply allowing it to be there. Without rushing to fix it. And that alone changes everything. Because the moment you stop resisting your own awareness, you start understanding it. And when that happens, you don't feel lost anymore. You feel grounded. Not because you have all the answers, but because you're no longer ignoring the signals that lead to them. So if there's a part of you right now that feels something you can't explain, don't rush to silence it. Don't force it into logic. And don't make yourself wrong for feeling it. Because this isn't a mistake. It's not a flaw. It's not something you need to fix. It's something you're beginning to notice. And maybe, for the first time, you're starting to trust it. Now here's where things start to shift. Because the real issue isn't that you feel something. It's what you do after you feel it. This is where most people unknowingly go wrong. The moment that subtle awareness appears, that quiet feeling that something is off, they don't stay with it. They try to solve it. Immediately. They start analyzing. Overthinking every detail. Replaying conversations. Looking for clues. Trying to turn a feeling into proof. And on the surface, that seems logical. It feels like you're being responsible. Like you're trying to understand what's happening. But underneath that effort, something else is happening. You're moving out of awareness and into control. And the moment that shift happens, clarity begins to fade. Because awareness is quiet. It's simple. It doesn't explain. But overthinking is loud. It creates noise. It adds layers. It complicates what was originally clear. So instead of understanding the feeling better, you start confusing yourself. You go from something feels off to what exactly is wrong? Am I overreacting? What if I'm making this up? And now, you're no longer connected to the original signal. You're lost in your own thoughts. This is the first mistake. Turning awareness into analysis. The second mistake is even more subtle. And it's something almost everyone does. They look for external confirmation. They need proof. Evidence. Validation. Something visible that justifies what they feel. So they start observing more closely. Watching behavior. Reading between the lines. Looking for patterns that match their feeling. But here's the problem. When you start searching for confirmation, you stop trusting your initial awareness. You begin depending on something outside of you to validate something that already exists inside you. And this creates doubt. Because now, instead of clarity, you're waiting. Waiting for something to prove you right. And in that waiting, your confidence weakens. You start questioning. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I misunderstood. Not because the feeling changed, but because you shifted your trust away from it. And then comes the third mistake. The one that creates the most confusion. You try to act on the feeling too quickly. You confront. You question. You react. Not from certainty, but from discomfort. You want answers. You want clarity. You want the feeling to go away. So you try to force the truth into the open. But here's what happens when you do that. You interrupt the natural process. Because truth doesn't respond well to pressure. When something is hidden, it already carries tension. And when you add more pressure to it, it doesn't release. It resists. It hides deeper. Or it shows up, distorted. Not fully. Not honestly. And now, instead of clarity, you get more confusion. Because what you forced wasn't ready to reveal itself yet. So let's look at the pattern. First, you feel something. Clear. Simple. Unexplained, but steady. Then, you analyze it. You question it. You look for proof. You react to it. And by the end of that process, you feel more confused than when you started. Not because the original feeling was wrong, but because you moved away from it. Here's the truth most people don't realize. You don't lose intuition. You override it. Not intentionally, but habitually. Through analysis. Through doubt. Through the need for confirmation. And the more you do that, the less clear things feel. Not because reality is unclear, but because your connection to it becomes unstable. And this is why so many people say, I don't know what to believe anymore. I feel something, but I'm not sure if it's real. I keep going back and forth. That back and forth isn't coming from the situation. It's coming from the conflict between awareness and overthinking. One is simple. The other is complicated. One is steady. The other keeps changing. And when you try to follow both at the same time, you feel lost. But here's the part that changes everything. The feeling you had in the beginning. Before the analysis. Before the doubt. That was the clearest point. That was the moment where you were most connected. And instead of trusting it, you tried to improve it. Explain it. Validate it. Fix it. But awareness doesn't need improvement. It needs space. Because when you leave it untouched, it stays clear. It doesn't argue. It doesn't rush. It just remains. And this is why, by the time proof finally shows up, people say, "I knew it from the start." Because they did. But they didn't stay with it. They left it. In search of something more solid. Something more logical. Something more acceptable. So the real problem isn't that you don't understand what you feel. It's that you don't stay with it long enough. Without interfering. You don't allow it to exist. Without trying to turn it into something else. And until that changes, the pattern repeats. Feeling doubt, confusion, delayed clarity. Over and over again. But once you see this, once you recognize what's actually happening, you stop trying to control the process. You stop forcing answers. You stop chasing confirmation. And something very subtle begins to shift. You become more still. More observant. Less reactive. And in that stillness, something interesting happens. The need to figure everything out starts to disappear. Because you realize something deeper. You realize that clarity was never missing. It was just being interrupted. And when you stop interrupting it, it stays quiet, stable, certain, even before anything is revealed. And that's where everything begins to change. Now let's go deeper. Because what you're experiencing isn't random. It's not emotional instability. It's not coincidence. There is a principle behind it. A quiet one. But extremely precise. And once you understand it, everything you felt begins to make sense. Joseph Murphy spoke about this in a very simple way. He said, "The subconscious mind responds to impressions, not explanations." Think about that carefully. Not explanations. Not logic. Not arguments. Impressions. Which means, your deeper mind is constantly reading what's beneath the surface. Tone. Energy. Inconsistency. Unspoken tension. It doesn't need someone to admit something. To recognize that something is there. It already knows. Before words are spoken. Before facts are confirmed. Before anything becomes visible. And here's where it connects to you. That feeling you've been having. That quiet awareness you couldn't explain. That's not your conscious mind trying to figure something out. That's your subconscious mind. Recognizing something instantly. And sending it upward. As a signal. Not in language. But in feeling. This is why it feels so different from overthinking. Overthinking is loud. It jumps from one idea to another. It questions itself constantly. It creates scenarios. But this is steady. It doesn't argue. It doesn't try to convince you. It just stays. Almost like a quiet knowing that refuses to leave. Joseph Murphy also emphasized something else. He said the subconscious mind never lies. But it also doesn't explain. It communicates through what you feel. Not what you hear. So when something feels off, before you have proof, it's not confusion. It's communication. Now here's the deeper part. Your subconscious is not only observing others. It's observing patterns. Subtle shifts. Changes in behavior. Energy that doesn't match words. Moments that don't align. And it processes all of this. faster than your conscious mind can keep up. So by the time you notice something, your subconscious has already processed it, already recognized it, already formed an impression. And that impression is what you feel. Not a guess, not a fear, but a conclusion that hasn't reached your conscious awareness yet. This is why you can feel something, even when everything on the surface looks normal. Because your conscious mind sees what is shown, but your subconscious detects what is hidden. And here's where the law becomes even more important. Anything that is hidden creates internal pressure. Because truth, by its nature, moves toward expression. It doesn't stay buried comfortably. It builds. Slowly. Quietly. But consistently. Think of it like this. When something is not aligned, when what is said doesn't match what is true, there is tension. And that tension doesn't disappear. It accumulates. Internally. Until eventually, it has to release. This is not about belief. This is about natural psychological movement. What is suppressed seeks expression. What is hidden creates pressure. What is misaligned moves toward correction. And your subconscious mind is sensitive to that pressure. It detects it early. Before it becomes obvious. Before it becomes visible. Before it becomes spoken. So when you feel something, what you're actually sensing is not the event itself. You're sensing the imbalance before it resolves. This is why the feeling is so consistent. Because the pressure is consistent. And until that pressure releases, the signal remains. Joseph Murphy also explained that the subconscious accepts what feels true. Not what is said repeatedly. Not what is forced. But what is internally recognized as real. And this applies not only to you, but to the other person as well. If something is being held back, their subconscious is aware of it too. Even if they don't consciously admit it. And that creates internal conflict. Because part of them knows the truth, while another part tries to suppress it. And that conflict creates even more pressure, more tension, more instability. Until eventually, something gives. This is why confessions don't happen randomly. They happen when internal pressure reaches a point where it can no longer be contained. Not because someone decides suddenly, but because something inside them can't hold it anymore. And here's the key connection. You're not waiting for the confession. You're feeling the pressure that leads to it. That's why your awareness came first. That's why the feeling showed up early. That's why it hasn't left. Because the process has already started. Even if you can't see it yet. So this isn't imagination. It's not emotional noise. It's your subconscious mind recognizing something real before it becomes visible. And once you understand this, you stop questioning yourself. You stop needing immediate proof. You stop forcing clarity. Because now you know something deeper. You know that awareness doesn't come after truth. It comes before it. And when something is building beneath the surface, you don't need to chase it. You don't need to expose it. You don't need to force it into the open. Because what is under pressure reveals itself naturally. And your awareness is simply the first sign that it already has. Now everything comes together. All the confusion. All the questioning. All those moments where you felt something, but couldn't explain it. They weren't random. They were leading you here. Because this is the part most people never fully understand. Your intuition was right. Because something is already building toward the surface. Not maybe. Not eventually. Already. What you've been feeling is not the event itself. It's the pressure before the event. It's the tension that forms when something is hidden, but cannot stay hidden forever. And your subconscious mind has already recognized that tension. That's why the feeling appeared before anything was said. Most people think intuition is about predicting the future. It's not. It's about recognizing what is already happening beneath the surface, before it becomes visible, before it becomes undeniable, before it becomes spoken. So when you felt that quiet sense of something being off, you weren't guessing. You weren't imagining. You were sensing instability. A gap between what is shown and what is true. And that gap cannot hold itself together forever. Because truth has a direction. It moves outward. It seeks expression. And when something blocks that expression, pressure builds. Internally. Silently. But consistently. And here's the key. That pressure doesn't just exist inside the other person. It affects everything connected to it. Energy shifts. Behavior changes. Small inconsistencies appear. And your subconscious picks up on all of it. Instantly. Without needing proof. That's why the feeling didn't come and go. It stayed. Because the pressure is still there. And until that pressure is released, your awareness remains connected to it. This is why you don't need to force anything. You don't need to confront. You don't need to chase answers. Because the process is already in motion. Think about it like this. If something is completely stable, you don't feel tension. You don't feel confusion. You don't feel that quiet signal in the background. Everything feels neutral. Calm. Clear. But when something is unstable, when something is being held back, you feel it. Not loudly, but persistently. Like a subtle imbalance you can't ignore. And that imbalance is not permanent. It moves toward resolution. Always. This is why confessions happen. Not because someone suddenly decides to be honest, but because the internal pressure becomes too strong to maintain the mask. Too heavy to carry. Too unstable to control. And when that moment comes, truth surfaces. Sometimes calmly. Sometimes unexpectedly. But always. As a release. So what you're sensing right now is not uncertainty. It's movement. Something shifting internally. Something building toward expression. Something that has already started. Even if you haven't seen it yet. This is the part that changes how you respond. Because once you understand this, you stop trying to speed it up. You stop trying to control it. You stop trying to extract the truth. Because you realize something important. You realize that forcing truth actually delays it. When you push. When you demand answers. When you try to expose what isn't ready. You increase resistance. You give the other person something to defend. Something to hide behind. But when you don't force anything. When you remain steady. When you don't react from pressure. You allow the process to continue naturally. And natural processes don't need interference. They complete themselves. So instead of asking, when will it happen? What exactly is being hidden? Shift your understanding. Recognize this. If you can feel it, it has already begun. The confession. The truth. The clarity. It's not something you need to create. It's something that is already forming. And your role in this is not to chase it, not to force it, not to demand it. Your role is to stay grounded while it unfolds. Because the moment you trust that, the moment you stop interfering, you align yourself with the process instead of working against it. And when that happens, things move more smoothly, more naturally, more clearly. This is why your intuition matters. Not because it gives you all the answers immediately, but because it shows you that something is already in motion. And once you see that, once you truly understand it, you don't feel anxious anymore. You don't feel confused. You feel certain. Not about the details. Not about the timing. But about one simple truth. What is hidden cannot remain hidden forever. And if you've already felt it, then you're not waiting for it to begin. You're simply waiting for it to reveal itself. Let's make this real. Because this isn't just an idea. It's a pattern that shows up again and again, in different forms, in different lives. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. The first story is simple. A woman once described a feeling she couldn't explain. Nothing obvious was wrong in her relationship. Conversations were normal. Behavior seemed consistent. On the surface, everything looked fine. But something didn't feel right. Not dramatically. Just slightly off. She noticed small things. A delay in responses. A subtle change in tone. Moments that didn't quite align. Nothing strong enough to confront. Nothing clear enough to prove. So she did what most people do. She ignored it. She told herself, I'm probably overthinking. There's no real reason to feel this way. And for a while, she managed to push it aside. But the feeling didn't disappear. It stayed. Quiet, but steady. Weeks passed. And then, without her forcing anything, the truth came out. Not in a dramatic way. Not through confrontation. But through a simple moment of honesty. Something had been hidden. Exactly what she had felt, long before she knew. And her first reaction wasn't shock. It was recognition. I knew it. Not logically. But internally. She had felt it from the beginning. The second story is different. A man working in a professional environment. Everything seemed structured. Clear. Predictable. But there was one person he couldn't quite understand. Nothing obvious. No clear issue. But interactions with that person always felt off. Subtle inconsistencies. A mismatch between words and behavior. Again, nothing he could prove. So he tried to rationalize it. Told himself it was just personality differences. Different communication styles. He kept working as usual. Ignored the feeling. Stayed logical. But the signal didn't go away. It stayed in the background. Persistent. Unresolved. Then, over time, small things started surfacing. Information that didn't match previous statements. Decisions that didn't align. And eventually, the truth became visible. There had been hidden intentions. Not obvious at first, but present from the beginning. And once again, his reaction wasn't confusion. It was clarity. I felt this. Not in detail. Not with full understanding. But enough to recognize it when it appeared. The third story is even more subtle. A friendship. No conflict. No arguments. But something felt different. Distance, without explanation. Energy, without clarity. The person didn't act differently enough to question directly. But something had shifted. And that shift was felt. not seen. So again, the feeling was dismissed. It's probably nothing. They're just busy. Time passed. And eventually, the truth revealed itself. Not as something dramatic, but as something that had been slowly changing. Something unspoken. Something that had been there, quietly, all along. And in every one of these situations, the pattern is the same. The feeling comes first. The proof comes later. Not because people are predicting the future, but because they're sensing what is already happening before it becomes visible. And here's what's important. In none of these situations did forcing the truth make it clearer. In fact, in every case where someone tried to push for answers early, things became more confusing, more defensive, more hidden. But when the process was left alone, when there was no pressure, no confrontation driven by emotion, no need to force clarity, the truth surfaced naturally. This is what most people don't realize. Truth doesn't need to be chased. It needs space. Because when something is under internal pressure, it's already moving toward release. And when you allow that process to unfold, it completes itself. Now think about your own experiences. Moments where something didn't feel right, but you couldn't explain why. Times where you sensed something before it became obvious. Situations where clarity came later, but the feeling had been there from the start. How many times have you said, "I knew this would happen. I felt something was off. I should have trusted myself"? That's not coincidence. That's consistency. And the more you recognize this pattern, the less you doubt yourself. The less you feel the need to overanalyze. The less you rely on external confirmation. Because you start to see something clearly. You start to understand that your awareness is not random. It's responsive. It reacts to what is real, even when that reality is not fully visible yet. And this is what strengthens trust. Not belief. Not assumption. But repeated experience. You feel something. You question it. You ignore it. And later, it proves itself. Over and over again. Until eventually, you stop dismissing it. You stop needing immediate answers. You stop forcing clarity. Because now you know something deeper. You know that when something is building beneath the surface, you don't have to expose it. It reveals itself. Every time. And your intuition is simply the first sign that it already has begun. Now the question becomes simple. What do you do with this? Because understanding something and applying it are two very different things. And this is where everything either changes or stays the same. Let's begin with the most important shift. You stop trying to figure everything out. Not because clarity doesn't matter, but because you understand that clarity doesn't come from force. It comes from allowing. So the first step is this. Stop dismissing what you feel. Not analyzing it. Not reacting to it. Just acknowledging it. That quiet signal. That subtle awareness. Instead of saying, "It's probably nothing." Shift to, "There's something here. I don't need to explain it yet." That alone changes your relationship with yourself. Because now, you're not rejecting your own awareness. You're allowing it to exist. The second step is just as important. Don't rush to act. This is where most people lose clarity. They feel something and immediately want resolution, answers, confirmation, closure. But when you act from that urgency, you're not acting from certainty. You're acting from discomfort. And discomfort leads to pressure. Instead, slow down. Observe. Let things unfold without interference. Not passively, but consciously. You're not ignoring the situation. You're simply not forcing it. The third step. Stay neutral. This is powerful. Because neutrality removes pressure. It removes emotional reaction. It removes the need to control outcomes. When you stay neutral, you don't add resistance to the situation. And when there's no added resistance, things reveal themselves more clearly. Neutrality doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're not reacting from fear. You're allowing truth to surface, without trying to shape it. The fourth step. Stop chasing confirmation. This one is subtle, but critical. Because the moment you start looking for proof, you shift your trust away from yourself. You begin depending on external evidence to validate something you already feel internally. And that weakens your clarity. Instead, recognize this. If the feeling is there, the process has already started. You don't need to prove it. You don't need to confirm it. You only need to remain aware, without interference. And this leads to the final part. The identity shift. Because when you begin living this way, you change. Quietly, but completely. You are no longer reactive. You don't jump to conclusions. You don't chase answers. You don't force clarity. Instead, you become observant, calm, grounded. You trust what you feel, without needing to explain it immediately. And that changes how you move through life. You stop second-guessing yourself. Because you've seen the pattern. You've experienced it. You know how it works. You stop overanalyzing situations. Because you understand that analysis isn't where clarity comes from. You stop needing validation from others. Because your awareness is no longer something you question. And most importantly, you stop feeling anxious about what you don't know yet. Because now you understand something deeper. You understand that if something is real, it will reveal itself. Not because you forced it. Not because you chased it. But because truth, by its nature, moves toward the surface. And when you align with that, life becomes different. You don't feel the need to control everything. You don't feel the urgency to solve everything immediately. You feel steady, even in uncertainty. Because your certainty doesn't come from knowing every detail. It comes from trusting the process. And when you live like this, you become someone who doesn't wait for clarity. You recognize it early. You don't chase truth. You allow it. You don't fear what's hidden. Because you understand it can't stay hidden. And that changes your presence. Your energy. Your decisions. You become someone who moves with quiet confidence. Not loud. Not forced. Just certain. Certain that what needs to be seen will be seen. Certain that what needs to be revealed will be revealed. And certain that your awareness is not something to doubt. It's something to trust. So the next time you feel that quiet signal, don't rush to explain it. Don't rush to act on it. Just recognize it. Stay with it. Allow it. Because you're not waiting for truth to appear. You're feeling it. Before it does.